everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing my July wrap-up. I read 7 books in July, which makes it my best reading month this year thus far. So let's just jump into some statistics. So like I said, I read 7 books, which came out to a grand total of 1,904 pages. There was 1 contemporary/romance, 1 horror, 3 fantasies, 1 thriller, and 1 graphic novel. I had 1 1.5-star read, 2 2-star reads, 1 2.5, 1 3.5, 1 4, and 1 4.5. So it was like a pretty decent reading month, but there were some not so good books. All 7 of them were physical reads, 2 were adult, and 5 were young adult. And as you know, I like to kind of go over the years that the books were released in. So there was a 2018, 1989, 2018 again, 2016, 1974, 2019, and a 2017. So a pretty good mix of different books there. I feel like my wrap-ups have been really long and rambly lately, so I'm going to try and get to the point more and not talk as much, so maybe this will be a little bit shorter than usual. But jumping into the first book that I read, it was This Lie Will Kill You by Chelsea Pitcher. This is a young adult, I would consider it to be a thriller novel. We follow these group of kids that are invited to go to this house that they think they are going to like solve a fake murder to win a scholarship, but it's actually real. And yeah, I really like that setting of like they think it's a game but like it's actually real, but unfortunately this just didn't really do it for me. This was my 1.5-star read, which actually makes it the lowest book I've rated this year so far. I normally don't have a lot of like 1-star reads because if I'm really not liking a book that much, I'll just DNF it and then I like don't rate it and I don't add it to my Goodreads. But this one, it's not that long, so I figured I'd just read it even though I wasn't really enjoying it. I'd say my biggest issue with this book was the characters. I didn't really connect to them, and I also had a really hard time like putting faces to any of them. Usually I'm pretty good at that, but with this one I kept getting the different characters confused and I just couldn't like connect a face to them because I just didn't really feel any kind of connection to them or an investment in what happened to them. And also the overall story wasn't super interesting to me, and at times it was a little bit confusing or far-fetched. So yeah, this just wasn't a good book for me. Next up, I read Sandman Volume 1 by Neil Gaiman. This is actually a graphic novel, which if you've been watching my channel for a while, you might know that I am not really a fan of graphic novels. I tend to kind of avoid them, but I was trying to participate in the biannual bibliothon. Didn't actually end up finishing any books for that readathon, but I was trying to read this throughout the week, and one of the challenges was to read a graphic novel, so that's why I picked this up. It is a horror graphic novel. It also takes place in the DC universe, which I had no idea going into this book at all, and it took me like a good half of the story for me to finally realize that they weren't just making references to DC things, that that's actually the world it was taking place in. So I gave this book 2.5 stars. Not surprising because like I said, I'm not really a fan of graphic novels. I find them very difficult to read. They don't really always flow right, so I do prefer graphic novels that don't have a lot of dialogue because that tends to be where I get the most confused. That's why Through the Woods was the only graphic novel that I ever really liked because it didn't have a lot of dialogue in it. I also did have an issue with the whole plot of this book. Like I couldn't really understand a lot of it. We follow Sandman, basically, if you couldn't guess, the legendary figure as he is. It is like the collection of all the comic books, so it's like many little stories into one big one, but I just found them a little bit confusing and it was just kind of difficult to read. That being said, I did really like the artwork in it. It is definitely like an adult graphic novel. There's a lot of adult themes in here, so I don't recommend for the younger readers, but yeah, I'm sure if you like graphic novels that this would probably be better for you, but just personally for my formatting taste, I didn't love it. Then read The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This was actually one of my most anticipated reads whenever it came out, and then I didn't read it for a really long time, but it was definitely one of my like 5-star predictions. Unfortunately, that prediction was wrong. I ended up giving this book 2 stars, which makes me very sad, but this book just didn't work right for me. So if you don't know what this is about, we follow a girl called Alice, and her grandmother was known for writing these really dark twisted fairy tales, but the stories are no longer in print and it's really difficult to come across a copy of one of these books. As you can imagine, Alice finds out that these fairy tales aren't just stories, they might be a little bit more than that. And it was just kind of marketed as a very dark fairy tale story. Once again, I think my main problem with this book was that I did not connect with the characters at all, and I actually found Alice to be pretty dislikable, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I just didn't really vibe with the characters at all, and also the story wasn't really what I expected. It kind of went off in a different direction, less fairy tale-esque at times, and so it just wasn't really what I expected it to be. So yeah, I gave it 2 stars, which is unfortunate, but there were still aspects of it that I enjoyed. I did like the writing, I did like the parts of the story that were surrounded by that dark fairy tale, but the rest of it was just kind of eh. So I then picked up Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This is the first book in the Wayward Children's series. I have wanted to pick up this series for a while because a lot of people have really loved it and have been talking about it a lot recently, and there are like a lot of books in this series and still more coming out. So I wanted to pick it up, but I avoided this book for a really long time because for some reason I thought that it was like more middle grade or like YA that was more on the younger side. Turns out it isn't. I'm so glad that I finally did decide to pick it up because I really loved it. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. If you don't know what this book is about, we basically follow this school. I don't know if that's really what you would call it, but it's for like the kids that have gone into these other worlds like Narnia or Wonderland or Neverland and stuff like that, and then they come back and they can't really handle the fact that they can't go back there, and also like their family and everyone think that they're crazy, so their family think that they're sending them off to this like school that's gonna help them realize that they didn't actually go to this magical land, but really the woman that runs this place, she went to one of these places, and so she understands what the kids are going through, and so when they come to live with her, she tries to help them come to terms with the fact that they may not be able to go back to this world that they want to go to. And I think that's why I avoided this book for a long time, because whenever people described it, they would use the words kids, like it follows these kids that went to these other worlds, but they're all teenagers for the most part in this book, so it's a YA novel 100%. Yeah, I just really loved it. I absolutely love all of the characters. They are extremely lovable. They're all different and unique. It's also a very diverse book, and the plot in general is just something that I've never seen done before. And while it's not super fantastical really, even though we're following kids that have been to these really fantastical lands, they are back in our world where there isn't magic, but it has this really good mystery to it that I really loved, and it was very suspenseful and intriguing, and I just really loved it. So I then moved on to Carrie by Stephen King, which is the first ever Stephen King novel I have ever read. I've wanted to pick up Stephen King for a long time, but obviously he has a vast array of works, so I had no idea where to start. Figured I'd just start at the very beginning with the first novel he ever published, which was this. So I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, which I'm kind of shocked about because the plot of this in particular doesn't super interest me. Like many other Stephen King works seem way more up my alley than this one, so I didn't think I would really like it, but I actually really did. There is something super like intriguing about his writing that just makes you want to keep reading. It's surprisingly easy as well. I don't know why I thought his writing would be like kind of dense and hard to get through, but it's like really easy to read and you just kind of fly through it. So while I did enjoy it and find it really easy to read, I didn't give it a higher rating just because it is not the best story ever. Like it's kind of cheesy and it still just isn't like my preferred choice of horror, but yeah. Overall, I did enjoy it, and I'm definitely going to read more of his novels. So then I picked up basically the exact opposite of a Stephen King novel, and that is Maybe This Time by Casey West. This is her latest novel. As you all know, I'm a very big fan of Casey West and all of her works, so I was super excited to pick this up. In this book, we follow a girl who works for a florist shop, and so she is at all the big events that happen in this town that would require a florist. And then there's also this boy that works for the caterer considering, and he also shows up at all of these events. So we basically follow them as they kind of really don't like each other at the beginning of the book and then slowly develop feelings as time goes on. This was just a really cute, easy story. I really like the characters, I really like the romance. As you could probably tell, it is a bit of a hate to love story, so if you like that trope, I would recommend this book. It is definitely a little bit cheesy and a little bit maybe juvenile for some people, so that's just something to be aware of, but I always enjoy just every once in a while a light, easy read like this, because as you can see, I read a lot of kind of heavier things, so it's nice to just have a little bit of like a break with this book. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about this one. It's another great Casey West book. I probably will never stop saying that, and I will never stop reading her books. And then the final book that I read in July was Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children's series. It's technically a prequel to the first one, so we follow Jack and Jill from the first one, but we follow them when they go into their world that they went to. Unfortunately, I didn't like this one as much as the first one. I gave this 2 stars, which was very disappointing for me. Jack and Jill weren't my favorite characters from the first book, so maybe that's why, but I also just didn't love the world that they were in. I didn't really feel in it. I think the world building wasn't as good as it could have been. And I think that's why it's kind of different from the first book, because like I said, the first book, it takes place in our world. There's not a whole lot of fantastical elements to it. It's mainly a mystery, whereas this one does take place in a fantastical world. I almost consider them to be like different genres. Like the first book would be more of a mystery for me, whereas this one would be more fantasy. And I just didn't really like this one that much, and I think it does come down to the fact that I didn't love the world all that much. It didn't feel real for me. I also don't know if the pacing worked as good in this book, so I probably should have mentioned when I talk about the first book, but it's only about 170 pages, and she's able to fit a mystery story without it feeling too rushed or like we missed something or skipped over something. It felt right. Whereas in this book, I felt like the plot of it needed more time, and this also is extremely short. So all of that mixed together just made it a kind of disappointing read, which is why I gave it 2 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in July. Leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!
You hear that, Samson?